been a, been a
And I
while
just
since
want
I've done
to,
a Lincoln one.
okay, I just want to interject quickly too, Kristen. Can you speak to the, also the changes or the differences between the Lincoln one and this one, or what you're seeing in it?
Well, it's been a while since I've done a Lincoln. It's been, I think, a year and a half. I've kind of gotten out of Lincoln a little bit, but the differences or the similarities, I will say, is that they don't specify as clearly. The difference is ours was exactly what we were going to do, which ones we were going to do. It was all part of the contract. Gave us 10 days to get it done. What would happen when we finished that inspection? Whereas Lincoln, you just said you're having inspections and it was a boilerplate. But what they did is put in an addendum. It was the authorization to obtain inspections, and you could list out which companies you were going to use for your inspections and which type of inspections, and that was helpful, so you knew what to expect. And I think that needs to be done with Omaha if you're going to not have it included in the contract. Otherwise it's just this blank open, and I haven't looked at the Omaha's one since I printed it out this morning. I didn't look at it yet. But if it's going to be just a blanket, you have this many days to get inspections done. The one thing that Lincoln did really well was have that authorization to obtain inspections, and then you could list it all out, and there were no surprises. You knew exactly what to expect. Does that help?
That's all fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to pull that up. I do have the.
So I just had a Lincoln agent write an offer on one of my listings. And so I have that addendum handy. And yeah, it just goes through who the escrow or who the title company is, what kind of title insurance they're getting, home warranty if they want it or not, what inspections. The survey is on that as well. But like she said, and these people didn't do an inspection. So I don't know what their resolution page looks like, but they do send an addendum with the offer that outlines every inspection that they're planning on doing.
Awesome. All right, let me. Sorry.
Interestingly enough, I mean, it doesn't refer to an addendum that will accompany the offer.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so while the inspection resolution addendum theoretically would be post, the inspection being received, and then you would provide an inspection notice addendum that it says 18.11 says an inspection notice addendum that sets out in writing any unsatisfactory physical items purchaser requests seller to correct, or a rejection notice addendum that notifies the seller after the inspection the purchaser finds that the property will be unsatisfactory. But if you look at 18, it says purchaser has been advised of the availability of the property inspections tests. Unsatisfactory home conditions, asbestos, mold, lead, radon, and other contaminants may exist in the property of which the broker or agent is unaware. Suspected contaminants and home condition may be identified with a typical air quality or home inspection, which I don't necessarily agree with, because I don't know how you're going to determine that you have air quality issues with a home inspection relative to not having the physical contaminants or, sent to a lab. But I guess that's a conversation for another day. But it says broker recommends purchaser obtain inspections of purchaser's choice to better determine the presence of contaminants and home condition. So it really goes on a lot in regard to air quality, which I find very interesting. It kind of makes it the focal point of the first sentence as it relates to property inspections. And it goes on to say, select an initial one. Purchaser elects not to have a property inspection, or purchaser reserves the right to perform property inspections. If the purchaser has reserved the right to obtain property inspection, the following provision shall apply. Then it goes on to say, purchaser at purchaser's expense shall have the right to perform any inspections or investigations related to the property the purchaser's desires, including a survey. if the condition of the property is unsatisfactory to the purchaser's subjective discretion, which means anything, purchaser shall provide the seller with, and then he has either the acceptance or the rejection. I'm not familiar with any. I would love somebody to correct me if they think I'm wrong. There does not reference an addendum that would afford the seller the right to know what specific inspections have been done. So I was under the impression that the board was going to prepare something, and clearly they have not, or not going to. So we will feverishly be working over the weekend to create documents that will help support this document. So it's kind of a hot mess, I'm not gonna lie, but at the end of the day, we'll just have to be prepared. So we'll prepare some addendums, we'll prepare some language. I'd like some feedback on this. This is a fair point. What do you guys think? And anybody is welcome to chime in. What do you guys think we should do in regard to those inspections? Should we prepare an addendum similar to Lincoln's that limits the, and we can put, I guess we're going to have to put it in paragraph 10.
Tom, I would love to see you come up with something. I just want to be able to say that we want to know what those inspections are now. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess we're gonna have to put something in paragraph 10 that would outline our purchaser's intentions as it relates to the inspection, and say see addendum as it relates to home inspection, and then attach that addendum that will identify that, similar to Lincoln, because and that might be a way to differentiate your offer, because if people just send this over because they're not going to have a board generated addendum at this point, as it sounds, and it doesn't reference it. So that paragraph, unless I'm missing something, and I'd love somebody to chime in, I don't see where paragraph 18 speaks of any addendum to accompany the offer as it relates to specific inspections. So essentially, this due diligence period will work in perpetuity. So this may play to our advantage. I mean, I suppose it can limit to a certain extent some of the inspection requests that the purchaser could have, but in some respects, it could strengthen our ability to be competitive, in that we're identifying those inspections versus the buyer being able to do about any damn thing they want as it relates to the inspection process. And then I think more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but as important, and we had discussed this on Tuesday, we're going to need, there's going to need to be some expectation set on behalf of the seller as to how many people they're going to want in their house, especially in these COVID times, about when there's inspections and how frequently. And so there's, as we alluded to on Tuesday, there's going to need to be a lot of due diligence and exercising in controlling the process from the agent's perspective, the buyer's agent's perspective, to set those expectations and try to stack those inspections so that we don't have sellers just out of their head about, 3-4 people coming in their house at different times in the event that we want all those inspections. So I'd love to get people's feedback. What do you think about all that? Poke holes in my logic. I'd love to hear something that you think's wrong about that, or a different perspective, because we're going to prepare these documents, and they're going to be living, breathing documents, and we can certainly evolve them. But I want to get people's feedback. That's what the intention of this conversation is to have dialogue about it. You guys are all smart, capable realtors, so let's hear from you.
Could I ask a question, Tom? So let's just pretend we're on the listing agent side now. We have a listing. Someone's going to write an offer on us, and they leave this pretty vague, if you would. They don't put in every inspection. They don't put everything in. Now we've got a counter to that, right? Or if we're in a multiple offer situation, now we've got 6 offers and we've got to go through these. Does that mean that we can go back and counter and say, here's what we'll allow? Here's what inspections will allow?
Yes, absolutely. And it's a great point, Jay, and I appreciate you bringing it up. So, and I would love to get other feedback, but my impression would be that, yeah, we're going to have to be way more judicious in the way we look at these. Kristen's got a comment. Kristen
I'm
Lynn.
wondering, on the same lines, if we have the listing, we have to put in the ABA and the wire fraud, all these other documents. Why couldn't we ask the buyers or potential buyers agents, just put it on the MLS and ask?
Lost you there. Do you guys hear her? I didn't hear any of that. Did you guys hear it? Or is that my fault?
Turn up your volume, Tom. Turn up your hearing aid.
No, it just said my internet was unstable. So I'm sorry, Kristen. I didn't hear that. Does somebody want to comment on that?
I can repeat if you'd like.
Yeah, please. I apologize. My
No
fault.
worries, no worries. On the same line as what Jay was talking about, if we have the listing, we're already putting documents up on the MLS, asking buyers to review them and sign them, including the seller disclosure. Why couldn't we also ask them to fill out this addendum that you're coming up with, to list out what inspections they expect to have done with their offer? Would that be?
That's really smart. Really smart. I like that. Yeah, that's a great idea. I think it's a fantastic idea. So you could just put in the associated docs, you'd say, sellers are requesting that in the event that you use the Great Plains Regional MLS LLC Uniform Purchase Agreement, that you specify in detail what inspections you intend to have as a result of presenting this offer, what time frame, in the event that you're interested in a different time frame that's suggested in the contract, and what and how many days, and how frequent. I mean, maybe we could even say, maybe that's too much. Maybe it's too much to say what days, because they may not know at the time that they're writing the offer. But maybe you could say verbally to them before you accept it, or maybe you could put it in the counter, is that we don't want physical inspections to be more than 2 days, or whatever, or it has to be mutually agreed to by the party, something to that extent. What else? I know you guys have other ideas.
Tom, could you put something in there as far as the response period or time frame that a seller has to respond to, a roofing contractor wants to come, in 3 hours? Could you put something in there about they have 24 hours to approve or deny all contract requests or anything like that to help with timeframes?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I like that too, April. I think that's very, very wise. And then I think, the other thing is, and we're going to have to think about this, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? But, it just seems so punitive to me, 14 and 18 respectively, and I'm speaking specifically to the days, about how long that the buyer has to provide a response and how long the seller has. I mean, gosh, if the buyer were to respond, let's say in day 2, it seems ridiculous that that the seller would need 16 days from the second, from that point on, in the event that they needed more time. Certainly we've all had extensions because they got to get the roofer out, or the HVAC person can't get there, or what have you. But that just seems ridiculous to me. So I get, what about your feedback on that? What do you guys think about the 14 and 18 days?
Well, my thought on it is that it's a really easy way to kind of play that old game of chicken. Because if you look at the way that it's written out, if the sellers really have until 5 p.m. on the 18th day, and if they don't respond by then, that whole thing can be automatically terminated. But this seems to make it really easy for the sellers to turn around and wait until 4:57, 4:58, because also written in there, it says that the buyers can rescind their request at any time. It seems
Right.
like that's going to create a lot of that, kind of bluffing, just waiting until that 11th hour to see if the buyers panic and pull everything back.
Well, and they could shop your offer, right? So
Yeah.
they could, I mean, if there's nothing that says, can somebody say, can we go back to gallery view? Leslie, can you do that?
Oh, yep, sorry.
So there's nothing that says that, that they couldn't shop your offer. So they could leave it on, they could mark it as contract pending, right? and then they could leave it on the market for backup offers. And then they could say, hey, contingent on home inspection and call agent, house available. And then they could ride your offer. They could even send your offer out and say, hey, we've got, if they get permission from the seller, they could even call other agents that are interested in showing it and say, hey, it's listed at 300. We have 325, but they're asking for repairs. If you'll match 325 and buy it as is, you can take it. And they'd have 2 weeks or whatever theoretically to do that. So, I mean, it's both ways, right? And then the other thing is, if you're representing a buyer, and Trace Burkhart, to her credit, brought this up today, so I don't want to steal credit, or credit's due. She brought this up very astutely. She said, hey, listen, here's another problem. What happens when the appraisal can't get done because it's a date certain now, and the seller doesn't give you a response till the 18th day, and you have a 35-day closing, and now you can't get the appraisal back in time because it's been extended too far. So that's another consideration for that extended time frame that's probably going to cause problems. So we need to be sensitive to that too.
I have a question. This is Sheila.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't have my video on because I'm driving, but if we put a list out there of the inspections that we're going to request to be done, let's say we just choose a home inspection, but from the home inspector going out, we determine that the roof probably needs to be looked at. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot because we didn't ask for a roof inspection to begin with? Or HVAC would be a similar situation.
No, because you could always go back then and say, I mean, I don't think so, because it'd be the same way it always is. Because you could always go back then and say, okay, well, if you don't let us get a roof inspection, then we're going to terminate.
Okay, great.
You see my point? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Hey, Tom, didn't the Lincoln, their contract, their purchase agreement, they're the ones that had originally about the 12 to 14 days or whatever to do your inspection and respond? Because I remember seeing that, but in a Lincoln contract. So is this change now happening because of the Lincoln MLS people?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And so why did, who agreed to that, and why did they think it was okay?
So when the Great Plains MLS happened, what happened was the OABR, Omaha Area Board of Realtors, merged with, what was the name of the Lincoln deal, Leslie? What'd they call it?
The GPR MLS, Great Plains Regional.
No, but what was the Lincoln one?
Oh, God, it started with an R actually.
It doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, they brought the two entities together. And so, and I spoke with the attorney yesterday. Mark Lapuzza is the attorney that drafted the purchase agreement in conjunction with this committee. And if the truth be told, off the record, I think the Lincoln people pounded on the table for certain things, maybe more so than the Omaha committee. So it seems like some of those things were enacted. That said, I think that the attorney probably thought that the Lincoln contract was a little bit better in some respects. So some of those things were adopted. I think there's arguments on both sides. I think that a due diligence period, it makes a lot of sense in some respects, but it's in this day and age right now, it seems so counterintuitive because you're lucky if you get an inspection at all, given the environment. So the timing of it is not wonderful from the standpoint of the way the market is responding currently. The other thing that's a problem is that I think that the timeframes are maybe even more punitive than the actual language as it relates to the generic nature of those inspections. The timeframes, I think, are even more punitive. So what do you guys think, though? I want more feedback. I want to get, because we're going to develop these addendums and they're going to come from this, a lot of it's going to come from this dialogue because you guys are in the street making it happen. So let's hear what you guys think. I want to hear more dialogue about it.
It's too many days to have inspection done in response. it's too loosey-goosey. And, you know, it allows for a lot of egos to get involved instead of just focusing on, you know, figuring out what needs to be fixed, what doesn't need to be fixed, and having a set time frame for that and keeping things moving along. Like I think April mentioned earlier, you know, what if it's taking forever and now the appraisal's coming up and the repairs haven't even been agreed upon or anything. I mean, it can really mess things up, I think, having so much time that's not needed. And of course, there's always the exception where you might need extra time for one thing to get checked on, but you, in the meantime, you've gotten the other 5 things checked on and squared away.
Right. I think it's interesting. I think Tammy Gaskin, very interesting and good thought that she talked about how pre-inspections might be of even greater import at this point, just because of the fact that, you know, these terms, and obviously we're going to try to mitigate some of the punitive nature of this by that cover sheet for our listings, which I think is brilliant from the standpoint of saying, this is, we expect this addendum to accompany an offer, or the seller is requesting that this addendum accompany the offer. I think that's a brilliant approach to it. I don't know who said that, if that was April or Kristen, I can't remember who said that, or whoever said it is brilliant. So I think that's really smart and makes a lot of sense. So what else, guys? What else do we have?
So one of my concerns, Tom, this is Jay.
Yeah.
What do people think about, and I know people will hate this, but starting to standardize a 45-day closing period? I know we've always tried to do 30, but with refinances and being busy, sometimes they are delayed in appraisals. With this too, that buys us a little bit more time.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a fair point, Jay. I think it kind of comes up between the, you know, the buyer and the, you know, the buyer and the agent, you know, kind of coming to, and I know they follow our lead a lot, but, and it's fair to say, you know, if, and maybe it's a trade-off, Jay, you know, maybe it's hey, if you want a longer due diligence period, you know, then, and you want all these rights afforded to you in this document, then you're going to need to understand and appreciate the fact that it's going to take longer. And then communicating to the buyer, hey, you know, but we might get pushback from the seller. The seller might say, no, that first of all, the terms that you're presenting as it relates to this kind of boilerplate due diligence period is unacceptable. And they might counter the timing too, or they might say, hey, somebody else is willing to close in 30 days or something. But, you know, I think that might be more cash driven too, Jay, you know, and of course, you know that, but, you know, if people have cash, then they can close quicker. And then generally they maybe are a little less inclined to do the, you know, have the due diligence period and so on and so forth. But I think it's a good point that, you know, we thought it was going there with TRID, whatever that was. TRID was 3 or 4 or 5 year, whatever it's been now. But, you know, remember when everybody was like, oh my God, it's going to take 60 days to close a file. And, you know, because you have that, you had to have it out, whatever it is, 48 hours ahead or whatever that was. So I think it's a good point though. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that or anything else as it relates to this?
Can I ask a question? If you were to put a extra addendum in place that outlines inspections that can be done upfront, which I do like the idea of, could we just make sure that within that form, we're not locking them into excluding any? So for example, if they don't check off mold on that list, but then the home inspector comes through and says, hey, I think I found mold somewhere in the house. Can we put some sort of verbiage in there that states, you know, we'll do X inspections or any as recommended by the home inspector, so that we can draw them back in if needed? We
can. I mean, I want to have a conversation about it. Devil's advocate.
Yes.
And Sheila brought this up. The problem is that if I'm a seller and you say, hey, I want this, this, and this inspection, and you say, oh, but by the way, especially in a competitive market like we're in now, but you say, oh, but by the way, if I don't like the way this sounds, and this sounds, I get to keep your cat and your dog, and you got to give me $5,000. I'm being facetious, but my point is that, and my point to Sheila was, we can put that in, but it might make our offer weaker. I'd rather renegotiate at the 1 week mark and say, if they say, hey, we want this inspection, and they say no, then say, okay, well, they're 7 days in, so they've sold their house to you in their mind. I personally would rather negotiate that, say, well, if you won't let us do this inspection, we're going to terminate. And, you know, and play it from that standpoint. I mean, you could see it both ways, but in today's market, if you said, I'm just thinking practically, so let's get on the other side of the fence. So you've got a listing, April, and you get an offer over and it says, we want this inspection, this inspection, this inspection. You're like, you know what, that's okay. Home inspection, we didn't have it pre-inspected. We're done. Okay, I'm okay with that. And we want a survey. Okay, whatever. It's just a, you know, it's not a PIN survey or state survey. We're good with that. And but then it went on to say, but in the event that we see this, then we want at our discretion to have additional inspections, and we can have increase the period of time for response or whatever. That might, you know, if you're the seller, if you're the listing agent, you might say, ooh, I don't like that. Let's find the one that doesn't have that in a multiple offer situation.
So then, in other words, not doing an addendum upfront that outlines inspections at all and waiting until you're into the period and then coming up with the determination as per it's written.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that. So my approach would be to delineate the inspections and provide a specific date, and not necessarily provide, you know, that caveat that we can have more inspections, but simply say, after you've had those inspections, in the event that they're unsatisfactory or inconclusive, go back and say, we're going to request additional inspection. And they say, no, you can't do that. Then say, well, I'm sorry, then we're going to terminate. Because at that point, the seller could say, if the seller doesn't agree to those, then that's a red flag, in my opinion. And if they do agree to them and you have them, it doesn't bind them to whatever those particular repairs could be anyway. So my approach would be I always think that when you're in a position to negotiate incrementally, you want to take that opportunity, especially in a limited inventory market, because if you're going to basically de facto be afforded that right, kind of between utilizing the other terms of the contract, then you want to incrementally negotiate everything that you want and kind of chip away at it. Because if you provide that at the onset, it may deter your ability to get the offer accepted. That's just my opinion. That's one person's opinion. Doesn't mean I'm right.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm right.
Okay. No, I agree. So, okay, that's helpful. So then what are we considering an inspection that we can ask for upfront? Is as part of, you know, these are the inspections we want. Are we considering that to be like roof and HVAC? Or are we considering those to be things that we wait until we hear what the home inspector has to say?
Well, it's a great point. So let's talk about that. I don't think we've determined. So it could be, you know, we could use the word whole house inspection, which is, you know, fairly generic, but kind of understood industry wide. And that was in the old agreement, right? You could say, we could compartmentalize it like they do in the old home inspection provisions had, but nobody really ever did it, you know, where it's just going to be, not very often at least, where it's just like roof or HVAC. We could have a major components. I mean, these are good thoughts. I'd love to get people's ideas about if we want to segment, if we want some segmentation on that. The only thing is, the more complicated we make it, the more we open ourselves up for liability as agents. But it's a fair point. You know, what items do we want on there to be considered as check boxes for the inspections that we may want done? And if on the list side, how do we want that communicated as a requirement of the buyer's agent? Any thoughts on that? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Hey, Tom. In my opinion, I would say for right now, at the very beginning, just to leave it the same inspections that are on our contract currently, because that's what people are used to, and then have that box for other if we want to write something in, and then we may need to tweak that later. But the more consistent we are with what people are used to, the less scary it is for people.
I think that's very smart, Don. I think that's a really, really good thought. I like that. I would agree with that. Great thought. Any other thoughts, guys, about anything on the new purchase agreement? I know the home inspection component is probably the biggest one. I have had some dialogue with some other brokers. I am still, and maybe, I think maybe I'm a little over the top on this because I haven't heard it as much, but that provision, paragraph 26 just makes my skin crawl. With the insurance and property damage provision, because it essentially says that the buyer, so it says seller shall notify purchaser, and seller and purchaser shall have the right to have the property inspected by an insurance adjuster or contractor, provided that such contractor must be licensed if required in the state, county, or city in which the property is located. If damage is found, seller shall be obligated to repair such damage prior to closing unless purchaser and seller agree to allow repair to be made after closing, and seller agrees to have held by the escrow agent 1.5 times the cost of the repairs, notwithstanding the foregoing. In the event that the cost of such repairs exceed 5% or insert number, purchaser may terminate this agreement. Purchaser and seller acknowledge and agree that there may be additional documentation and access needed to facilitate the repairs. As such, seller and purchaser agree to cooperate in executing documents necessary to complete the sale in a timely manner. Access to the property for repairs shall not be unreasonably withheld. That scares the hell out of me, but I don't like it at all. I think it's very arbitrary and capricious. I think it opens our sellers up to incredible liability as it relates to a contractor coming in and saying, hey, there's some dimples on these on this clad windows, these pillow windows on the back of this house in Lake Allure that's got 67 windows on the back, and oh, by the way, you need to replace them all, and it's $100,000. And what would the seller say at that point? I mean, what protection do they have in that provision that provides for them not to be obligated to do so? At a minimum, it's a mess and a fight. So talk me off the ledge. Am I wrong about that? Am I missing something?
Well, isn't this very similar to what we're already doing? And you can write an addendum that states something different to supersede whatever's in the contract, that buyer and seller agree XYZ. I mean, that's what we would do with the radon. If they requested radon, we'd either write it out or have a separate addendum that stated radon will not be done. Buyers and sellers agree, whatever.
Well, I agree, but essentially you'd have to counter every single contract then.
Yeah, true.
Because you don't know there's going to be a hailstorm until there is a hailstorm. Right? Because it's after the contract is written. So I don't know. I mean, to me, that just seems, but maybe it's not as big a deal as because not that many people seem to be as worried about it as I am.
Hey, Tom, if
So-
we're going to do our own addendum to put in the MLS upfront identifying inspections, could you just have something on that addresses that section?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely could to counter from the seller's perspective. I mean, what do you think, Don? Do you think I'm overreacting on that? I mean, I'm
No,
curious.
I think it's a disaster. I mean, it
Yeah,
has to be
I
something that's
agree.
mutually agreed upon, or something that says if the insurance adjuster says there's damage, the seller will repair. It can't just be open-ended with any contractor saying that.
Yeah, that's my take. So. Okay, that's good. That's good stuff. I think we're making progress. So this is giving me more clarity in regard to this addendum. I think these have all been really, really good thoughts. What else in the agreement gives you guys pause? Where do you think it's flawed? What concerns you? What keeps you up at night in regard to this agreement that we think we should address?
I have a question.
Yeah. Hi,
Is
Gina.
someone amongst you and Leslie and whomever going to run point on taking all the questions that are going to be coming at you come Monday, February 1? Like,
Yeah,
this
that's
is-
me.
That's
Yeah,
you.
that's me. Yep.
I mean, are you just gonna live by your phone? Because I am very unnerved by this, very unnerved. This was already a very hard job, a very tough market, and now, I don't know, I feel like my reaction to this is like different than a lot of people's. Like you're saying things like, this really worries me. Yes, and it's happening 3 days from now, 4
Yeah.
days from now.
Right, and I understand, and we're gonna protect you with everything in our power. It's gonna be a long weekend, and it's gonna take a lot of hard work, but we're gonna do it. Part of being a greater in a larger organization, from the standpoint of the board. Well, now it's the whatever it is, the Great Plains Regional MLS, is that we don't always get to make the rules, so we have to be nimble. But I think if we thumb our nose at it and we don't engage it, it's going to be, they're going to come up with something that's going to require use. It's coming, because Leslie, you can attest to this because you were part of that executive board meeting that we had, 2 Tuesdays ago. I mean, they spent the entire meeting thinking about ways that they can get people to comply. So it's coming. So we could either, thumb our nose at it and try to work with what we have, or we can kind of embrace it, work hard to get real competent with it, make the necessary adjustments that will give ourselves a competitive advantage in the marketplace by doing really smart things on the buyer side and sell side from the standpoint of addendums with best practices, and try to lean into it. And so I think it makes more sense to lean into it and try to make it an opportunity to be more competent and to get ahead of it than it is to run away from it. I just don't think there's a path to not engage it, in my opinion.
I agree with all of that. It's just the timeline. I just cannot believe that such substantive changes are expected to be digested, enacted, applied appropriately and skillfully come Monday morning. I know I don't feel prepared to do that. And yet I just want to be sure I'm understanding that you as the broker are requiring that we use this document, or yes, requiring.
We are going to use this document. Yeah, because the problem is if we
On
don't.
Monday morning, we have
On
to start.
Monday morning. Yeah. Because if we don't, I'm going to have the addendums in there. Trust me, and they're going to be well done, and we're going to get them all done. But if we don't engage, here's what I want you to think about this. We can use this as an advantage. You've got to think about it in this context. If we're better at it and better prepared, we can use this as a strategic and competitive advantage, because people are not going to be prepared. So if we have these addendums in place, we can actually outperform the market for our clients as it relates to certain terms. So we'll be more prepared on the seller side. And if you get another contract on the old contract, fine, you're prepared for that. But if you get a contract on the new contract, we're going to be prepared for that. And when we're writing them, we're going to be prepared, and we're going to be able to know what the best practices are to put ourselves in the best position. So I think we can use this as a win, but it is daunting. It is not perfect. It is scary in some respects, but I want you to know we're going to be with you the whole way. We're going to have the documents prepared, even though I know they're last minute, but we have an opportunity. They kept saying we're going to come with adjustments. They haven't. So we're going to lean into it. We're going to do it from our perspective and our end, and we're going to make sure that we're successful with it. So any other thoughts you guys have on this?
I mean, could you just in essence like cross stuff out and say, and have your buyers initial it, say, we're not agreeing to this portion of the purchase agreement?
Well, I wouldn't recommend that. I would do it in the form of an addendum.
Okay.
So we're going to have addendums. We're going to have addendums in place on both sides that we think will allow our side to be more successful. Okay. And in the 10% or 12% chance that we're on both sides, it'll be interesting. But we are, we're going to prepare ourselves to be able to be in the driver's seat. So we're going to be leaders on it.
I guess my question is, why are these changes, who do they benefit? Do they really benefit the buyers and or the sellers? Because I get the feeling it's just a way to complicate things unnecessarily in some instances. And I mean, I didn't think that the purchase agreement we already had was terrible. I mean, I thought it was pretty straightforward and clear. And it feels like this is just stirring the pot, just trying to make things for giving an opportunity, I feel like, for agents to argue more in a lot of regards.
Yeah, no, I
Thoroughly.
think I think that's fair. I mean, change is always hard and people are slow to change. And I'll tell you that, so purchase agreements that are written like this, and this is true in all jurisdictions. Many of you have heard the term adhesion contract. So an adhesion contract is written to the benefit of the party that is presenting the contract in whatever instance. So purchase agreements are always and have always been in most jurisdictions skewed toward the purchaser. So this purchase agreement is none. I would make the argument that this, by and large, not every provision, but by and large, moves the needle that much more towards the benefit of the purchaser. Longer due diligence periods, broader language, stuff about insurance claims that are arbitrary. You know, those terms benefit the buyer. So that to me needs to be greater addressed from an addendum on the seller side to make sure that we're trying to level the playing field. That said, it's a bit counterintuitive. So think about it in this context. While your buyer may be better served if this market was a seller's market or the market equilibrium, a buyer's market. But now that it's obviously been a robust seller's market for the better part of 4 years, and it's on steroids at this particular moment, could be more of a seller's market. If you have a contract that goes in and it doesn't have, it's not presented that well, and it looks like there's a lot of punitive terms on it, and you're in a multiple offer situation, you're going to get beat up. So we need to think about how to stair step our approach to this and be smart. That's why I wouldn't put a bunch of broad language in that says that you can have, more inspections if this happens or that happens. We're already afforded that benefit. We're already afforded that right. We can terminate. So there's a practical reality of how we can present it. So you have to think about this twofold. How do we protect our respective clients, purchaser, seller? And then how is the market going to respond to this from the standpoint of actually winning? Whether that be on the seller side or whether that be on the buyer side. What are the best practices that are going to afford us the opportunity to be most successful? So those addendums, while they're going to be intended to protect the purchaser and the seller, they're also going to be prepared under the mindset of, hey, how do we win? How do we win? How do we disproportionately win? And that's going to be necessary from a practical perspective, because the contract can say whatever it wants, but if we never get an offer accepted, who cares? It doesn't do us any good. So that I want you to be thinking in that context. There's the legal confines of the contract and what it entails, and how we want to address that from the standpoint of addendums to clarify things and to make sure that it's suitable from a contractual standpoint. But then there's the behavioral and the negotiating skills and tactics that are necessary in the real world and on the street to actually get a deal done, right? So we need to be thinking of those two have to marry somewhere. And so that's why we need these addendums to be thinking about it in that context.
So Tom, from an offensive place, and it was brought up also here, and I saw it also in the notes about pre-inspections. I think it would be beneficial for us to put our heads together and come up with some strategies for best practices and ease of use and costs in becoming more of a pre-inspection focused kind of, at least on the listing side. So I think from the education side, we could probably contribute to that if we together get some strategies together, maybe talk to some inspection companies. Maybe I think there's a both and in that pre-inspection thing that sends a lot of people away. It's the, oh my God, they're going to uncover everything, or they're not going to uncover enough. But is there a middle road that we can define that becomes part of, like, on a Better Homes and Gardens listing, this is what you're going to be able to count on, is
Yeah.
this kind of comprehension.
And I think it's a great point, and it was brought up by Tammy, and I think you're echoing the value of that, Carol, and I agree with you. I think that it is a strategy and a tool. I think that we need to be careful not to pigeonhole anybody. I think people need to work with their sellers, and they need to make a collective decision on the risks and the benefits. But I think that it is clear that due to this environment and this potential, the potential for this due diligence period being excessive from a time standpoint, what have you, it does make sense and probably will increase the probability of pre-inspections, especially if this tight market continues. And I think it is a good strategy, and in many instances will be employed by many of our agents who are already using it. But but given the set of circumstances that we're in now as it relates to this new purchase agreement, to your point, I think will be even a greater asset. But I do think you can't, not everything, not every situation is the same. And I think that we can't paint it with such a broad brush that we say, hey, in every circumstance, because there's circumstances, even in this market, where I believe pre-inspections might not be the right decision. Generally, I believe it is the right decision, but not always. So I think we need to continue to have a conversation about when and where and why. But yes, would this enhance my thought process in regard to inspections? 100%. I mean, I don't think anybody's drunk out there yet, because we haven't had one ill-advised kind of incomprehensible statement. I'm kind of disappointed because it's almost 5 o'clock and not one person is, just wasted and saying something crazy. So very, very.
To say something crazy and ask people what they liked about the new purchase agreement.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's fair.
I like that the personal property is added, and I also really like that there's time frames on deadlines now, because that's just, I don't know, that's my personal preference. I like those additions to it. Some of the reorganization of things has been okay and kind of easier to use, but wanted to kind of hear what you guys think that you like some of the improvements on.
I like the timeline thing with the 5 p.m. deadlines and whatnot, because I've had issues with that in the past, ruining vacations and deals.
Okay, somebody, come on. What else? What else? There's other stuff. I know there's other stuff in there.
I know I'm the weirdo, but I look forward to the negotiating potential here. I mean, there's so many ways that we can differentiate ourselves, and so much that we can do to protect both our buyers and our sellers without using just their standard language. Like, I know everybody's all hung up on the 14 days, but you can counter anything out.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah. I think we could use it as an asset. I'm appreciative of the fact that people feel like the learning curve is daunting just to know what's in it. But I think the best way to maybe go about it is take the old purchase agreement and take the new one and sit it side by side and go through page by page. Just do it a couple times and you'll be amazed at how clear stuff is starting, the differentiation is starting to get, and or will get. And I agree with you, Don. I mean, there is nothing in a contract that can't be agreed to by the parties, that is different than the boilerplate language. And we need to do certain things to make sure that we're stacking the deck. Basically, we want to stack the deck on each side, and we can do that with addendums, and we're going to have the suggestive addendums. Obviously, the biggest one is the one that we're going to ask the purchaser to provide on the list side. Saying my internet is unstable. Can you not hear me?
We can
No,
hear you.
Can hear you.
You're clear, actually.
So what else?
I actually have a question, just because we're in that market right now where sometimes you have to use an escalation clause. Paragraph 10 says you have to disclose it under number 33 And number 33 is where you list out the different addenda. Which section do you put that in? Under disclosures or checklist of documents or the addenda? It could go in two different
Well,
places. Does it matter?
so you're saying where do you, if you want to check the boxes for the list of attachments, where do you put the addendum that we're addressing that has to do with
Escalation
that?
clause.
Oh, escalation clause.
Escalation
Yeah,
clause.
you
Did I
could-
say inspection? I
could-
meant escalation. I'm sorry.
No, you said escalation and I screwed it up, but you're generous. So what I would say is the escalation clause could go probably under the addenda, more than likely.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It doesn't really matter, but yeah, I mean, I should say it doesn't matter. It matters, but I think it would be appropriate to put it, probably more appropriate to put it under the addenda, but if you put it somewhere else, it would be fine.
Now, are they stating that we have to check off which items that we are attaching to this, such as the wire fraud, a pre-qualification letter?
So we talked about that.
I missed it.
Yeah, excuse me for interrupting you. I'm sorry.
No, go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we talked about that on. Yeah, no, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but we talked about that on Tuesday a little bit, and it's a fair question. So yeah, and not everybody can attend everything, so it's great. I'm glad you brought it up because there's people on this that haven't heard it either. We talked about kind of the pluses and minuses. We do not require that everything is listed and the check marks are by it, because there's circumstances where it's not necessarily in the purchaser's benefit to have certain things identified. So we are leaving that at the discretion of the agent.
All right.
Something that I like that I think is a great addition is where they clarified or went into greater depth about the assessments under number 5. I did run into a big issue with that this last year, and I wish it would have been written more along those lines. So I think that's a really great improvement.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think that it is clearer and more precise and reasonable. Because more than, yeah.
I actually like the differentiation that Dawn is talking about also, because we end up clarifying that we're not going to do what is assumed in a contract. Like, we're not going to take the whole 14 days. We're not going to take the whole 7. We're not going to do every single inspection. We end up having to clarify all that. I think this way, like what Dawn was saying, is I think we can just differentiate ourselves. You know, I'm always looking for the positive side of things, but I think we can more easily differentiate ourselves from the all or nothing to the no, just specifically this. We're only going to be looking for this from this inspection, you know, not everything else that could possibly pop up. So more is better, that we don't have to reinvent ourselves or write in stuff like, I think what Leslie was saying about the you know, the appliances and all that. I mean, that was really thoughtful. I think whoever decided on all that was thought through very well, especially the smart products, you know, anything that can become the stopping block in a contract. So yeah, and I think the other thing, Tom, and then I'll be quiet here, is I think we'll give this like a month, and then we'll do an ATA specifically on, hey, what did you guys figure out? What are some tips that are working? And, you know, as well as keeping the conversation going, I'm sure, through email and Facebook page. But I want to specifically like follow the crumbs back on some agents that have had a lot of activity and have really learned how to play this to the benefit of our buyers and sellers. So.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Carol, because I think it's really important. And like everything, we're not going to stand in place. we're gonna hit the ground running, and we're gonna keep getting better every day. And the addendums that we start with, more than likely we won't end with. So we'll start with them, we'll work with them, we'll poke holes in them, we'll add to it, maybe we'll delete, we'll add, we'll be ever changing. We might start Monday and have it look a little different by next Monday, but it's gonna have a lot of the things that we've talked about that seem to be problems. And that's why this is the third session we've had as it relates to this. We're going to continue to have them. We're going to have a panel at some point that's going to review the addendums. And we're going to do, that's probably going to be kind of a special training session. That's not going to be an ATA more than likely, because we're going to have it sometime next week. But we're going to have a panel of experienced agents that are going to go through the addendums that we're providing, and they're going to be, and it's going to be unfiltered, right? If they have a problem with something, they're going to say, hey, I don't like exactly the way this is written. We're going to use this as a sword. We're going to use this as an opportunity. We have great people. We are a great company full of really, really talented people. And this is another opportunity that we have to demonstrate our significance and competency and leadership in the industry. And we intend to make lemonade out of what could be perceived as lemons here. So we are great people in this group. They're really smart people and really hardworking and really honest and sincere people. And we will come up with a solution here together that will outperform the market. And that's not inconsistent with what we've done for 5 years. You guys have built this thing not based on leading from behind, but leading from the front. And that's what we're going to continue to do. It's a company led by agents for agents. And we're going to keep doing that. And we're going to keep listening, and we're going to talk and have dialogue and argue and about certain elements. And that's healthy. That means that we're growing. So if we're having disagreements about specific things, specific policy points as it relates to contract language, that means that we're really diving into it. And that's a good thing. That's a positive thing. That's a healthy thing.
No question. I have a question.
Sure. Hi, Kathy.
Hi. How do you see the radon being handled, since it doesn't say the seller has to pay for mitigation anymore? So now you have to do an addendum and play chicken with the seller, like who's going to back out of the deal if the seller won't pay for it after you're that far into it, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of going to be like everything else. It's going to be negotiated, kind of like, mold or anything else. It's just it's going to be on the table, just like anything else would be. And I, Kathy, personally, and I can't everybody, I personally thought that was an overreach when it was in the other contract, because why would that specific problem supersede a whole bunch of other problems? I mean, to me, radon's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Second leading cause of lung cancer. It is a big deal. It is proved science. It's not a deal. But I don't know that it's necessarily less significant than black mandated in the contract. So I've always thought that it's a bit of an overreach, and it should be negotiated in good faith, like everything else, in my opinion. So I'm actually a proponent of that change, but that doesn't mean that everybody agrees with that. And if you want radon to be paid for, you could certainly put in the addendum that in the event that radon is elevated, that the seller agrees to mitigate the radon. That's going to be a hard sell today, maybe someday when markets change, but I think today that might be a disqualifier. But but it's a fair, because most sellers are countering it out. I mean, I don't know, guys, aren't most sellers countering it out anyway right now?
Seem to be.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it's fair point. Fair point. Thanks for bringing it up, Kathy. It was a good thought. God, this is a somber bunch. Gee, Merry Christmas. It's like somebody's cat died.
Hey, Tom, if you write an offer on the 31st and you're still in counters on the 1st before you get into contract, is there any, what happens
No, you're
there?
good. That's fine.
Okay.
And the thing about it is that we're going to have to work with these contracts on the other side. Let me be clear about something. If you get a contract, it could be the old contract. I just did a deal with remember the 4-pager? I just did a deal on one of my rental properties. It was on the 4-pager. It was like they kind of write a note, says, hey, we'll buy this thing for like $75,000. And I guess if you want to take it, then we'll have a deal. I mean, it was like on a napkin, but you know what? I mean, it happens, right? You get FSBO contracts that are goofy sometimes where the person wants you to use the lawyer. I mean, there's going to be circumstances where there's going to be lack of uniformity on this thing. But I would work, if you get another contract that's the old contract, which is our current contract, I wouldn't counter that out if it were me. I would work with it. But you're going to have to talk to the seller about the differences. Now, we are going to have to be careful about that because you're going to get contracts that are going to have, when you're multiple offers, you're going to get contracts that are going to be the old one, and you're going to get contracts that are going to be the new one. And you're going to have to be able to talk to the seller. That's why we're going to have that addendum. And you're going to have to, this is not going to be easy. Am I a fan of the way they rolled this out? I am not. I am not a fan, but I'm telling you, it is coming. It's coming hard. And we can be ahead of it, or we can be. And I think we took the position that it makes more sense to get ahead of it. Now, reasonable people can disagree with that, and I don't necessarily think that that's not a fair statement. But we had to make a decision, and leadership is about making strong decisions, and sometimes they can be arguably not always the right ones. But that's why we're going to stack the deck to make sure that we're ahead of it. We're going to use it as an asset, not a liability. That's the approach that I'm taking.
I'm wondering about number 13 with the automatic extensions and delineating if it's a 14-day automatic delay for these 3 reasons: financing related, closing another property, or title issues is what I'm reading it as. I'm hoping that the effect of that is to encourage agents to seek out with their lender like a realistic closing date and write that in the offer. I hate competing against people who are writing 30 days when there's no way that that's going to happen. I don't know if this encourages that, but I'm just curious if anyone else is thinking through any ramifications or stuff to watch for related to number 13.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And if anybody wants to comment, please do. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Well, here's what I'll tell you. I like it in this regard. I like it because it affords the seller and the purchaser to get out. So think about it from this context. If the lender is not willing to give the seller a the purchaser a denial letter, they have to wait theoretically, right? They're locked in that deal because there was no way for them to get out. Previously, if you look at the other contract, it was 10 days past the closing date. Only the seller was afforded the ability to void it or cancel it, choose your term. So this is more reasonable in the sense that if you had a seller hoping against hope that their financing was going to get through and the buyer found another property that they wanted, theoretically, they couldn't write on that. You know, maybe they could have gotten the other property because it was $20,000 less and the ratios weren't so tight. So you think about, does that make sense, Allison? Does that make sense to you, that thought process?
No, I got to sit with that for a little longer, but
okay. But I think 14 days, you know, I think 10 would be better. But it also, you know, I wish they would have talked about, again, I wish they would have talked about cash. You know, a lot of people say, hey, I'm going to write, you know, I'm writing for cash. And then they get 3/4 of the way through the deal. And then they're like, oh, you know what? Interest rates are so low. Actually, I'm going to finance. And I get this call all the time and people are like, well, what does that mean? Can they do that? And my position has always been, there's no Nebraska precedent on it that I can find. But my position's always been that if financing if cash or financing wasn't material, then it wouldn't be included in the contract. So that it is a violation of the contract and it is a breach if you change the fundamental terms. Now, as we all know, most times the seller agrees to it in some form. So they'll say, okay, you got to up the earnest deposit. It's non-refundable. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. And they get some concessions made so that it gives them a level of comfort with the closing. But in previous to that, you know, it only talked about it in terms of financing. It didn't talk about it in terms of these other circumstances. So I think that in that regard, it's favorable, but it is not perfect. I agree with you.
Lots of people keep bringing up the timeline on the home inspection of the 14 days being really long, but I do want to point out it's pretty much the same as the old one. A lot of people wrote in 10 business days, like the 7 or the 10 business days. So if you take that 10 business days, it almost equates to being exactly the same as that 14 calendar days. I was just taking it, if you did it on like the 3rd, 10 calendar days takes you to the 16th, but then so does 14 business days. So most of the time we're going to be within a 1 to 2 day. So that's really the difference that you're looking at on that side. I don't know if that helps at all on the, because that seems really long at face value, but it's not that different from what we've been doing.
You know what? That's a great point, April. I think that's a very, very good point. And I think that was lost on me. I didn't think about it in those terms. The only thing I would say is that what happens if Mr. and Mrs. Buyer or Miss Buyer or whomever makes an offer, they have a home inspection 2 days later, and they give the response 2 days after that, and then the seller can sit on it for 14 days. That was I'm more concerned about that.
I think that's something that I'll start doing as part of that is when I turn in the, request, just try putting in that we want there to be like a, 3 or a 4 or 5 business day response time, and seeing if I can get them just to agree to it on the initial request that I send over to try to tighten that up. I'm wondering if that might work.
And I think here's the thing, I think practically speaking, if you're a realtor, you don't want your seller stewing on that thing and have the ability for the buyer to back out. You don't get paid that way. Hey, remember the old adage, time kills deals. That is think of all the cold feet right now in today's market where people wake up the next, we got 30 some odd people left on this call. You guys know it as well as I do. Think about all the people that, the next morning after their 17 offers are like, oh my gosh, I'm out. We made a terrible mistake. I mean, that's way more common than it was 5 years ago, in my opinion.
Hey, Tom, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because we ran into this, I don't know if you remember, but I had a transaction where at the home inspection, we tried to change the timeline on when we wanted a response. And in this case, it was from my seller to the buyer. And you said we couldn't do that in our inspection addendum response because we were contradicting what was in the original offer, the language of the original contract.
I said you couldn't counter.
So it used to be
right, because
days to respond, and I said no, I want a response in 24 hours, and you said, well, you can't really fundamentally do that because you're changing the terms of the original contract.
And I agree with that. I'll stand by that.
So if we want to shorten those timeframes, we have to do it in the original counteroffer.
I absolutely. Yeah, you can't mandate, you can't unilaterally ask for something that has been contractually bilaterally agreed to by the parties. So if you want something to be different, you have to identify that at the onset of the contract. You can't unilaterally change bilaterally agreed to terms, if that makes any sense. You have to address that at the time. Now, if that provision wasn't in the contract at all, then you would have the right to suggest certain things as a result of what you would agree to. So you could say that if it wasn't identified in the purchase agreement to begin with. but you couldn't mandate it. It would have to be mutually agreed to.
So when you're requesting your inspections in the purchase agreement or as an addendum with the purchase agreement, couldn't you stipulate there that buyer requests seller's response to inspection addendum within 3 business days as opposed to
100%.
the 18th day?
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely. That would be absolutely binding on the parties if it was mutually agreed to. If they sign the addendum. Now, if they don't sign the addendum, all bets are off.
True.
So you can't just send, anytime you send a contract over, it's just like I can send you a contract over for a house in Linden Estates with $1 written on as the purchase agreement, but you don't have to take it.
Right.
But if you sign it, you do.
Right.
So if you send the addendum over with the purchase agreement and they don't execute the addendum, and that's why you want to make sure that when this is a good point of clarification. That's why you want to be very careful when you send over the purchase, when you send over the purchase agreement, or when you're countering, that you say, when you're sending it over in 10C, that you say, please see addendum whatever, it shall be a permanent part of this agreement. Okay. And then even though the addendum says it's a permanent part of this agreement, if they sign the purchase agreement and they don't sign the addendum, then you can have a mess. So you want to make sure that you have identified that your offer is fundamentally conditional on the addendum that's being provided. And sometimes we don't do a good job of tying those documents together as an industry, not specifically talking about you for sure, or anybody in our organization, but it's very important that you don't have those documents don't stand alone. I'm aware of the fact that the addendum says it shall become a permanent part of that agreement, but if it's not referenced in that agreement and you don't include it, you don't make it abundantly clear that the addendum shall be part of the agreement, then you could have a problem. And it doesn't come up very often, but I have seen somebody play games with it once, and they got some traction with it because it wasn't identified. They didn't identify the addendum. They sent the purchase agreement and the addendum simultaneously. And even though they had talked about it, they didn't tie in the purchase agreement, they didn't tie the addendum to it. And so when it came over, they signed the purchase agreement and they didn't sign the addendum. And they said, I don't know what you're talking. We have a binding contract. You didn't, this is something you asked for, but it's not something that's mandated because it's not part of the contract. And they're right. I mean, it's a chicken, you know what thing to do, but.
So then in this case, it would be very beneficial to include it on section 33 as part of the addenda that's being sent over. I know sometimes we don't always include our addenda because we don't want the lender to get involved and say, oh, you have to give this to us. Oh, we see something in there. We're not going to give you the lending now for whatever reason. But this is where it would be really beneficial to check it and tie it in, as well as in paragraph 10.
Or you send the addendum over conditional upon the purchase agreement and have them sign the addendum first, suggesting in the addendum that in the event they don't execute the purchase agreement, that the addendum is void, and have them sign the addendum first and then sign the purchase agreement.
Okay.
There's a will, there's a way, guys.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Sure.
How is this strategy not applicable and applicable and everything else to the nightmare of escalation clauses being able to be set aside? Why can we not? I'm just like theoretically wondering why this is different when we've been told that they are in fact able to not respond to escalation clauses.
Well, because if you have to counter out the escalation clause. So when I do a counter on the as the seller, I specifically state in there, the escalation clause shall not be a permanent part of this contract, and it is hereby void. And then I go on to say this is the counter. So I identify, I think it's best practice to identify in your counter as a seller that the escalation clause is not a part of the contract, and then go on to say price to be 150,000, all other terms to remain the same. Boom. So if you don't identify that if you don't suggest that that escalation clause is not a part of the contract. Now, arguably, if you forgot that, as long as the seller didn't sign the escalation clause, it's not part of the contract, because remember, they still have to sign that document. You know, you can't, anything that comes over, it's unilateral, and it holds no, it's not concrete, or it holds no stature until it's executed by both parties. So theoretically, the escalation clause would not be applicable if it wasn't executed by the buyer, or excuse me, by the seller. But just to be clear, I would always counter it out on the counter from the seller's counter. So it's abundantly clear to the parties that the escalation clause shall not be a part of this contract. And then I would send it back to the buyer, crossed out with an X on it with void, and attach it to the documents that went back. That's what I would do, but maybe that's overkill. I'm a freak that way. You're going to be okay, Gina. We're going to sell a ton of real estate. You're going to make a lot of money. It's going to be good. I'm just not that worried about this, you guys. I'm not. I mean, it's a process. It is going to be, there's going to be some stuff, but you got this, and we're going to use it as a sword. I'm telling you, we're going to get through this. We will get through this. I'm on the phone. We're going to talk through it. Any questions, you get something over, you want to talk about it, I'm a phone call away. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not getting rid of me. We're going to make it work.
Hey,
I
Tom.
like your suggestion. I'm going to do it. It's a great idea to take the current purchase agreement and read it next to the new one and do your own highlights as well. I mean, it's just like, you got to do your homework so you know what you're getting into. That's a great suggestion. So I am definitely going to do that. Thank you for that.
I don't know. I'm sure somebody else came up with it. I don't have very many good ideas. How does that work? I've never come up with a good idea, but we steal only the best. That's my attitude, right?
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
On that addendum that you're writing up for us that we can use along with things that are going into the MLS, can it say on there, both on the buyer side, and can we have something on the seller side where we change the response time on the addendum? Because people, if you write it into section 10, they're going to really look at that section with a microscope. If it's on an addendum with other things, they may not pay as much attention to that and throw up as much of a fight.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's on the buyer side. I don't know that on the seller side, we want to do it, because we don't necessarily want, I mean, we might want to shorten the period, but we wouldn't necessarily want to shorten our response time.
No, not the seller's response time, but the buyer's period to do an inspection and give a response on the buy side, and then, or on the sell side, sorry, and then on the buyer side, along with identifying which inspections, putting something in the timeline.
Yep. Totally agree with that. Yes. Answer is yes. I think you're 100% right. I think Don's just going to write the addendum. Did I hear a second? So you're not laughing, Don.
As many
I'll give you
contracts
all
as she
of my
writes, she
opinions.
probably will.
I'll give you all of my opinions on what you do, Tom.
So
Fair
you're
enough.
saying, like, you identify the inspections in a checklist, and then there's like a fill in the blank, like this many days to conduct them.
Yes.
Respond by this much. Okay.
Yep. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, Lincoln's had something similar to that, if you're going to use that as a template.
Yeah, Leslie sent it over. I know that this seems a little helter-skelter. I get it. But you know, we just got to work with it. So we're going to work with it. It's going to happen. We'll have it done Sunday night, come hell or high water. So we'll have it out. We're going to train like crazy on it. We're going to keep training on the addendums. We're going to keep training on the purchase agreement. We're going to keep hammering it. We're going to do several sessions every week. We're going to do best practices. We're going to do panels. We're going to fight with each other. We're going to do it all. So we're just going to keep working. Hey, this is a company of collaboration. This is right up our alley. This is what we do. So it's going to be a good thing in the end. Silver lining, we're going to win more and we're going to protect our sellers more. And they're going to win more because we're going to make sure that nothing gets passed through us that other people aren't thinking about.
Yeah, just to reiterate what other people have said, everything is awesome with you guys, you, Leslie, Tim, Carol, right there at the helm leading us. We thank you so much for getting us on board and giving us time to get acclimated and getting our opinions. Thank you for everything. You really are a better brokerage, and I'm so thankful to be a part of it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kristen. That's very generous. And but we're doing it. We're only able to do all this because of the grace that you provide us and the effort. We don't make this happen. If you guys don't sell houses, none of this happens, and we don't have the resources to work together to create solutions. So it's all from the sweat of your brow. And don't think that I don't think about that. And I'm not thankful for all 250 of you. And don't forget our 14 staff that work their butts off and put up with all my idiocy and stupidity when it comes to getting these Zoom calls organized and everything else. They work really hard and do a great job, and they believe in you guys and they're for you guys. So it's all good. Let's keep talking, send emails, phone calls, whatever. I got to roll because I've got to get to a kid's game, but let's keep moving and let's keep talking. Think about it tonight, put them side by side, pull and push, think about what you want on the addendums, and it's going to be a quick 4 days, but we're going to get it done. Okay. Leslie, you have anything to add?
No,
Tim?
all good. I really appreciate
Carol?
all of your insight.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Appreciate
guys.
you guys. Thank you so
For
much.
everything you all do to make it this way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.